Hey everybody, welcome back to the saw shop. We're back at the bench. Today's video, let's do some lower transfer work to the 394. But before I get to grinding, I want to talk about porting theory and how it may affect your build. You see me doing huge lower transfers and increasing case capacity, and you might say to yourself, Tin Man, most guys want a lower case capacity and decrease blowdown, and they do a lot of different things than you do. Why is it that you increase capacity? Well, in today's video, let's talk about my theories, right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm going to tell you guys my theories on case capacity and the way I build my saws. And I want you guys to look at the total package. I've made tons and tons of videos on trying to show how a piston port two-stroke works. Today's video, let's talk about case capacity and the do's and don'ts, or how it all works as a package, and why I build things a little different in their run and other guys build things a little different in their run. They both run good. Who's right and who's wrong? Nobody's right and nobody's wrong, and I'll discuss this with you guys.
She cuts, eh?
You're porting a 394 or whatever, it could be any saw, and you're thinking, what should I do? What shouldn't I do? Well, that's why I always say keep your intake timing sane. So let's talk about the intake portion of this. The longer your intake is open, okay, the longer your intake is open, the less vacuum is being pulled on the case on the way up, okay? On the way up, your piston is pulling a vacuum on the case before your intake opens. So think about that. Okay, so that's the first thing you want to think about, is how much vacuum. Also, the bigger your intake port, okay, when it does open, it may bleed that pressure off quicker. So you really want to be careful how much you're widening and how soon your intake is opening. Now, you guys may notice I tend to run lower intake timing than other guys that you see, and you might ask yourself why. So think about that, okay? This saw is going to have like 158 total degrees of intake timing, okay? So a lot of guys might run this at 162, 164, 166, so you got to ask yourself why. So that's number one. Number two, you see me running bigger transfers. Now, if you go on the internet, there's all different kinds of theories on transfers. The bigger the transfer, lower transfers, the more case capacity. So you're filling a bigger jug, but you're doing it with the same piston. Now remember, on the way down, when you're compressing it, the same size piston compressing a bigger case will end up in less pressure, okay? So this is something we got to think about when we're porting saws. So the more case capacity you add, the less pressure you're creating when you open the transfers. Okay, so you might look at how I do things and go, well, doesn't that decrease airflow and volume? So think about it as a package. I have less intake timing, so I'm pulling more of a vacuum on my intake. On the way up, right? My intake opens later, I pull more vacuum. Okay? On the way down, my intake closes sooner. So I'm creating vacuum sooner in the downward stroke and for a longer period of time, which makes up some of the case capacity issues. Okay? Now, if you're going lower case capacity, you may get away with a smaller transfer if your intake opens sooner. And the reason why that works is when you hog out your intake and open it way sooner, you're pulling less of a vacuum on the case. So when the intake opens, you're pulling less of a vacuum through the carburetor, okay? And that's why you see some guys, they have really long intake timing and really big intakes, and their saws don't spit back, and you gotta ask yourself why. And spit back is when you're overpressurizing the case, when the piston comes down, it's squeezing too much of a volume, and before the intake closes, it spits back through the carb. You can end up with a really rich saw doing that. I don't seem to have that problem, and the reason is I have larger case capacity, okay? So I can fill, my bottle's bigger, okay? So I'm filling a bigger bottle with a little bit more suction on the intake side. I hope you guys are following me with this. So if you have a bigger transfer, you probably want less intake timing, which is kind of counter to the thought process. But at some point, you're going to hit diminishing returns between how much vacuum you're pulling and when that vacuum bleeds off. You want that vacuum for as long as possible and as strong as possible to fill the bottom end. Now, let's talk about your upper transfers, okay? The top half of the stroke. I tend to run longer blowdown than some people do. 24, 25, 26 degrees. The longer the distance of blowdown between your exhaust opening and your transfers opening, the more time the combustion chamber has to empty out that spent air and fuel that's been burnt in the last combustion cycle. Okay? If you give it more time, the lower the crank, or the lower the pressure in the combustion chamber, the more chance that when that transfer does open, even at a lower pressure, you'll fill more of the combustion chamber. Okay? The other way to do it is smaller transfers, short blowdown. Some guys push their blowdown to 15 or 16 degrees, and their saws seem to run good. And you're correct, they do. The difference is with short blowdown, their combustion chamber pressure is probably higher than mine, but their transfers are pushing with a little bit more force. Now, if you've ever taken apart a short blowdown saw, often you'll see soot or a dirty upper transfer. And the reason for that is when they first open, often the pressure in the exhaust port and the combustion chamber is greater than the pressure coming out of the upper transfer. And what happens is that exhaust goes and gets pushed in slightly into that lower pressure area, which is the upper transfer, everything below into the case. And then when it balances out and the piston's going down, guess what? It starts to push back. There is a fine balance. And the only way you're going to hit that is to horse around with these things for a lifetime. So I like a little more case capacity. What does that also do? Well, I often find it moves the power up, and it can make it a little peakier. If you're a little bit more inexperienced with saws, or you tend to dog in and then pull the trigger, you might not like more case capacity. You might have a saw that doesn't have a lot of power down low. My theory in that is I run my saws at wide open throttle. So to me, I want my power right at the top. Even if it's 2,000 RPM where it's making its power, I'm going to keep it there with a sharp chain, proper rakers, and good sawmanship. So that's my theory in all this. And the main thing is for me is some of these bigger Huskies, the transfers are blocked. Okay, they hit the wall of the cylinder, and when the piston's going by the lower transfer, even at that higher pressure, that air is hitting a wall and will come back and can create some disruption in the natural flow into the upper transfer. So my theory is I would rather move that power a little bit higher, make the saw a little bit peakier, but get more air fuel on top of the piston on every stroke. Now, another thing you can do, longer blowdown, lower case pressure, but higher capacity. You guys notice a lot of us run good pipes. Look at my 572, friends. That's a short blowdown, low case capacity saw. That's crank stuffers. That saw, I found, didn't have a lot of mid-range or top-end power other than right up here, but I found it was kind of lazy stock. Put a pipe on it, and the saw seems to have more power, and it's just stronger. And the reason for that is that pipe is creating a little bit of a vacuum, and it's pulling air out of the transfers on every stroke, is my theory. And that saw runs really good. So, and again, here's the stock cylinder. Okay. Put your light on here. Notice. Okay. The windows are as wide as the edges of the skirt. Notice. Okay. With the piston straight in there. The windows are not hitting the transfers. Not on this side. Okay. They're not hitting the transfers. That's going to create some airflow issues. 100%. Okay. You can see in the bottom really well there. I might not be able to widen these as far as the piston's telling me to, but I'm going to go in there and see what I can get. Remember, if you're going to do this, you're limited by how much meat is here. Okay. I don't know about you guys. We've all done it where you grind a hole through the side of the transfer. So be very careful. And actually, Mark that made the ram horn pipe from Super Cool Saws, I was talking to him one day, and he mentioned he found a micrometer that can measure inside and outside, and he'll actually measure the thickness just to see, you know, how much meat is left. And I thought, you know, that's actually a really good idea. Okay, so have a look at that. Another thing I want to mention is I don't do heavy machine work. I'm not a big high compression guy. Again, I get flack for that a lot. But I don't do a heavy machine work. Now remember, every time you lower this cylinder, you see guys they'll drop a cylinder 40, 50, 60, 80 thousandths. Well, you're decreasing case capacity. So you're making less case capacity. Then they'll go in and really open up these transfers. Well, if you measured and you really hog these transfers out, but you drop this, 40, 50, 60 thousandths, you may end up with the same case capacity that you had stock. So just a little bit of thought process. And I'm going to mark this out and get rocket and rolling. Here it is all laid out. Put your piston in there and draw yourself some reference lines. And really pay attention. How much overlap do I have on the intake? Okay, right here, right there, and right there. How much overlap do I have? And then make sure that's not too skinny. If it's too skinny, you can actually get bleeding through there. Okay, when the case is under pressure. And same thing, make sure your exhaust isn't too wide. Okay, I think I got lots of room in there, so let's go with that and see what we can get going. I'm also going to blend them down at the bottom. I'm not going to cut these all the way to the case. I've done that in the past, and what I find is on smaller saws, this saw might be able to handle it, but what I find on smaller saws is what actually happens is the saw can get kind of lazy because you're really decreasing your primary case pressure. So if you're going to cut them lower, you might not want to widen them at all, is what I'm finding. So this saw has a big piston for a chainsaw, and I think we can get away with a little more, but again, have one last look, and I'm just going to jump in and grind this. Okay, it's 45 minutes later or so. I've roughed in my lower transfer. Again, eyeball it with your piston. Try not to go too far, because again, you could have this rough edge riding on your piston skirt. Okay, do you guys see what I'm doing now? So the air flows through the windows. Okay, here and here, and look, they're not blocked now. Okay, so that's what I'm after. Yes, I added some case capacity, and I did increase the volume of these lower transfers, but it's not as much as a person might think. To me, and again, you do you build your saws, I'll build mine, because again, who's right and who's wrong? I'm not against other ways of doing things. This is just my thought pattern. Okay, these windows hitting this wall and being half blocked off, just like the 288, I don't like it. That 288 we built, that Farmer Tech, that thing was an animal when I was done. And I think the reason why, because again, I didn't go crazy on that saw, was I just widened the lower transfers. So again, it takes about 5 or 6 different shaped burrs, couple of different size of egg shape burrs, a long straight burr with a rounded end, and a ball burr. And I just cycle in between them as I go. I use the ball in the corners to smooth it in. Now, this is where you can only get so far down into here, okay? This is where a fella might want to go in and blend his upper transfers. Now, if you don't have a right angle tool, don't worry about it. Leave them. It'll be fine, I promise you. I didn't have a right angle tool for a lot of years. And then Tony Alto jumped into the channel years ago and he's like, hey, I sent you a Fordham tool and a right angle kit and I just want to help the channel out. Thank you, Tony. Good fella. And anyhow, so that kind of gives you an idea of what you want. I'm not even going to do the other side on video because I want you guys to just see stock. Again, stock, half blocked off. The transfers hit the cylinder wall. Now, even at a higher pressure, I don't think that's a good deal. At a higher pressure, that transfer charge hitting that wall is going to not flow properly to the upper transfers. That's my thought on a lot of these big saws. Okay, where I'm going to do this 9 out of 10 times on my saws. And I think they work pretty well. Okay, here's the finished port work. Now, I'm going to take my piston, put it in there, so that you guys can see. And I'm just going to try and zero this out. Or not zero it, but you guys know what I'm saying. Straighten it out, zero it out. I'm thinking timing numbers. Okay, here's our finished port work. Notice there is a little ledge on both sides. Right there where you can see that I haven't cut in. I went a little too far there, but I just stopped right on the edge. And instead of continuing to grind, I left it, okay? So that side's a little wonky, but that's fine. Okay, now look. When you look through, ooh, that's a good shot. When you look through the windows now, what do you see? Transfer. Okay, let's check the other side. Again, just a small ledge there. Okay, this is really going to help with airflow, but again, without the accompanying pipe that I'm going to make, intake, timing that is built for this higher case capacity, and the right amount of blowdown, this saw may not run that good. So again, this video is just more about balance your port work. You see guys online doing this and that and the other, and sometimes you may get lost in the details where you're like, well, this guy did this and that guy did that, so I'm going to put the two together. You can't always do that, friends. So again, more case capacity, I like less intake timing, okay? Less intake timing so that I get more vacuum on the way up and more compression on the way down, okay? And longer blowdown. And those are the two reasons why. Because remember, if my transfers open higher, as you're looking, okay, the sooner my transfers open, the sooner I'm done building case pressure, okay? Because that uncorks it. So that's the reason why some guys do higher upper transfers, but smaller lower transfers, less case capacity and more intake timing. And other guys, like me and various others, will go bigger transfers, less intake timing, and longer blowdown. Okay? So, I also find a bigger saw. You can play with the numbers a little bit more, but I'm going to sit and think about this, whether I want to do the upper transfers. I may leave this thing stock upper transfers. I may go in there and blend a little bit, but I mean, realistically, I can probably get this thing where I want it with the transfers the way they are. Now, I find they are a little bit small, but we'll talk about that in the next video. Okay, friends. I have a big light hanging real close to me so I can see. I left it in the shot so you guys can see how I do it. That way when I'm grinding with my Fordham, I can actually see exactly where I'm going in and not lose what I'm doing. That's very easy to do when you're grinding. So this looks pretty good. Just looking at it, yeah, I think we're going to be fine here. And I'm really anxious to get this saw together. Anyhow, friends, like I said, it's all about balance. Your numbers, your port shapes, your timing, case compression, blowdown, exhaust roof. All that, friends, adds or subtracts to what you're doing. And it takes a long time to get a good know-how. At the beginning, you just start grinding. As you do more and more and more saws, you start to go, wait a minute, and you try different things. That's where keeping really detailed notes really helps. But you do that long enough, and after a while, you'll notice certain rules apply, and the more you do it, you go, wait a minute, and you'll notice that, less is more often. Anyhow, friends, this week I should be finishing up this saw. Now, what I'm going to do here, whether I do the upper transfers or not, I probably will go in there and do a little bit of upper transfer work with my right angle tool. Go in there and raise them just a little bit. I want a little bit bigger upper transfer. I find these are kind of small for what I'm doing. But other than that, I'll go around with sandpaper, do all the edges, give this thing another quick hone job, and then we can start assembling it. Anyhow, thanks for watching. Take her easy. And again, experiment and try different things. There isn't one way to port a two-stroke. Everything matters. Pipes, timing numbers, shapes, sizes, all that stuff matters, friends. So take it all into consideration and keep good notes and try things for yourself. Thanks for watching. Take her easy. Later.